Hi, my writer loves. How are we all doing today? I'm really excited for this video because we're finally going to be getting into our craft talk. We're going to start with something bigger because I think I kind of like the idea of starting big and kind of working our way down to the simple, refined craft things, because that comes into the revision component and even just practicing like new things. And what I'm talking about here is like sentences, syntax, looking at the characters, like the individual characters, and kind of experimenting with that. And I think that's at the core of it what writing is. It's experimentation and exploration. But today, what I want to talk about is world building. Now, I'm really excited about this. And if you are writing, even if you're writing nonfiction, even, I think world building is still important. Your reader needs to be comfortable or not familiar, but they need to feel like they are also being placed in the world of your story and your writing. And for nonfiction, you might be like, what? Why? They already live in this world. I get that. But I still think it's important because they might not be familiar with your part of the world or whatever part of the world that you are talking about. So I think world building is still very important here. Yeah. So, and obviously, this one's also very important for fiction and fantasy, as you are probably introducing us to, a big unfamiliar world, especially in fantasy. Yeah. So, I'm going to start with that. Alrighty. So, let's get into it. Let me grab my notebook. So, I'm going to go kind of down the list of what we're gonna need when we're building this world of ours, and or of your own, I should say. And then I'm gonna get into like cut. And then I'm gonna get into some of the like techniques and important things to note about how we are integrating this world into our writing, and so on and so forth. Okay. So, first of all, geography and landscape. That's easy. Are there beaches around? Is it kind of like tropical? Is it a forest? Is it like a very grassy land with a forest and a river? Is it in like a desert? You have to decide, where it is. And if you're creating, this is specifically for fantasy, but if you're creating a new universe, this might be helpful. It might be helpful to draw a map of the world. Like, whatever you believe the world looks like, whatever you're thinking the world looks like in your story, whatever planet they're on, I think it would be very helpful if you drew yourself a map just to kind of get an idea. And then, yeah, but I think the main thing we're also focusing on, it's important to know, like, the planet, and if it's not on Earth, like, where is it? But, like, if it is on Earth, like, does Earth look like it does now, or is it completely different? Like, are like are the continents very different? So obviously that's important. And I think when we're deciding these things, you have to think about your main character, whoever your main character is. When you are creating these things, keep your protagonist in mind. I will say more on that later, but I just want to, like, introduce the idea now. So then you need to decide, government power systems, who does and doesn't have power, politics, are there people in charge? Is it just like chaos all around? These are things you have to figure out. History. Now, I will say, my novel that I'm currently working on, I handed it in to a professor because it's a fiction writing class, and I handed it in to her because I thought her feedback would be really helpful, and it was. And I had a lot of world building in my prologue, and, like, it was kind of just a history lesson. And now I'm realizing that would turn readers away very, very quickly. Don't give a history lesson at all, unless it's part of the story, unless your character is learning something about the history or the world through another character's dialogue, or, like, through a vision. I don't freaking know what it would be. But if it's just the narration, don't give a history lesson. Again, I think the whole idea is that we are trying to integrate this world and this world building into the story. So I think, you have to, if you're gonna do some explaining and some describing, I think it's important that you keep it very, very brief, and you do it in a natural way where it fits into the story properly. So yeah, I think, sorry, I wanted to move, get more comfortable. Okay, so then we have religion. Is there a religion? Are there different religions? Does your character practice any of them? Is there a kind of religion that's specific to your character? Again, things we need to ask ourselves. Communication and language. If you're talking about the whole world and your character is traveling in whatever world they're in, is there a common language? Are there a bunch of different languages? I would assume that there would be, but I don't know. It's not my world, it's your world. So, that's important because, and, like, if is there technology? You know, is this a futuristic world, or is it kind of inspired, like, through a futuristic world? And, you know, is that a way of communicating? You know, are there robots that we can walk around and talk? I don't know, you know? Things you need to ask yourself. Are there rules ever, or is it just, again, pure chaos? Or if there are rules, what are they? And make sure those rules are, like, coherent. You know, they can't, and make sure they make sense within the context of your world. And I'm saying that because even if it's a fantasy world, you, throughout developing this world, I think you naturally develop rules for the world. And so I think it's important to like, yes, you have a lot of leniency in fantasy because, like, anything can happen, but within the context of your world, is it limitless? Or are there implicit rules within that world that you've kind of, without outrightly saying it, introduced to the reader? I don't know, you know? Culture, so like social structure, social hierarchy, societal values, things like that. What they wear, what they eat, what they live, their currency, you know, their employment, what kind of non-human animals or creatures are there, what are their roles in this society. So, you know, these are all important things that we need to think about when we're creating our world. And the reason that I start with world building as the first craft element to talk about is because of course all of these craft elements we're experimenting with as we're writing and after we're writing, and all the, you know, in revisions and stuff. So again, writing is all about experimentation and exploration. And I think a lot of that is also in your world building too, you know. And so it's also important when you're considering your story, because, you know, you have to, like, you're going to need a place where this happens. You know, you need, like, where is your character and kind of what is their place. And that kind of brings me to the protagonist thing again. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about this. You need to establish your protagonist's place in this world that they're in, that you are creating. What's their role? Who are they in relation to the world? What are their struggles in terms of all these things? Very, very, very important. A character's goals are usually linked with their history and their role in society. And we're going to talk about character in another video. Trust me. And we will talk about setting, and we will talk about everything. But it's important when you're creating this world to consider, why am I telling this story that takes place in this world? You know, like, what is compelling me to write this story in this realm and universe and world, and what does the protagonist have to do with that, and why is that important? Why is that dynamic important? Those are things you have to ask yourself when you're developing your story. And world building is really hard. And so that's why, you know, it's good to ask yourself all these questions about it, because it is difficult. I mean, you're creating something so big and completely new and unknown to you, let alone everyone else in the world that's gonna be reading this story, if you ever decide to publish or whatever. If you don't, of course, absolutely fine. I have plenty of things that I write and do not publish because I just love writing. But yeah, so I think, you know, that's all important. Yeah, and in terms, okay, let me say this first. Okay, so you have to kind of ground the reader. There should be some things that are familiar in your world, that are familiar to our world as well, to the real world, the real life. Okay, even if it's just small things, like small activities, like, I don't know, like birds chirping in the forest. Like, we know, or just birds chirping in general. We know what that is. We're familiar with it. Blah, blah, blah. I'm just using that as an example. But yeah, it just helps, because sometimes when the strangeness gets too crazy, we're like, oh, right, like, sometimes the reader can get lost. So it's important to do that. Also, the setting, okay? The setting itself has cause and effect. And what I mean by this is, you know, there is, it can happen in two different ways, I think. You know, one is like, okay, characters in a desert, okay? The water, there used to be water, but the water has now dried up, so the ground, there's just more desert where the river used to be. Okay, that's kind of a stupid example, but you get the idea. Okay, like the thunder, not the thunder, I don't know. The hurricane came, and because of it, there were like a bunch of trees that fell over. I don't know. So that's like nature on nature. And like the actual setting kind of I don't know what word I'm looking for. But it's the setting forcing these things onto itself. Now, it can also be the setting forcing something onto the characters. Okay, so back to the desert. The water has dried up. Okay, now the characters have to figure out where they're gonna get water. Right? Okay, that was a way better example. So I apologize for my bad examples. Yeah, and I think the overarching idea of world building is to introduce and show the complexity of the human condition. And I think there's a reason that my professor didn't really explain that, because I think it's kind of up to your interpretation, Humans are, we kind of tend to inflict our own troubles onto ourselves. And, I think what she means by the complexity of the human condition is the good parts and the bad parts. Do with that what you will. But yeah, so what I want you to do for your prompt for this video, create a world out of, for each of these specific bullet points, geography and landscape, power systems, history, religion. Use a different country, like a different country's, like, I'll give you an example. Use South America's geography or landscape, like the rainforest, blah, blah, blah. And then use the power systems of I don't know, like a different country. And then or continent. Well, for that one you would have to do country, but yeah, I don't know. You kind of see that, I kind of just had that thought and it wasn't really well formulated. But I hope you get my idea. Pick a different country for each of those bullet points and create a world out of the different countries in our world. I think that would be really, really interesting and really fun with the experimentation, and kind of see, are there things that really don't, can you do anything with that kind of thing? Or again, are there implicit rules where things just wouldn't match? I just think that would be interesting. So that's your prompt for today. I also quickly, only because the video is not super, super long right now, and I just want to bring it up. Yesterday, I had this thought, and I was like, I was scrolling through YouTube, scrolling through whatever, and I noticed how, a lot of the videos that you see of people's writing processes aren't realistic. And now, here's the thing. I know that, you're always supposed to take whatever you see on social media with a grain of salt, because, people show, it's like an illusion. And it's kind of a distorted image of reality, is what social media is. And so, it's hard sometimes to relate when you see certain videos. And I was looking at, and seeing how people really romanticize their writing and make it seem like there's always ideas flowing, and they never get stuck. And I just wanted to come on here and talk about two of the main struggles of being a writer that I personally have experienced. And I just, this is just kind of to be like, you're not alone. Other people experience the struggles of writing, and sometimes these writing process videos aren't very accurate, and they're hard to relate to. And at some point, I want to do a video of like a week in the life of a writer. And it's going to be realistic. Because listen, here's my first struggle, okay? My writing fluctuates every single day, and even within the day. Like, one day I can be really, really inspired and I can write, 20 pages. And then the next day, I maybe only write like one, because I'm just not like specific. I'm not like motivated enough, or I'm not inspired enough, And then the next day I might be a little bit more inspired, but not as inspired as 2 days before, and I might write like 10 pages, and then maybe I'll go back and it'll be like 5. And then it'll be 20 again. It changes every single day. And even during the day, I am kind of like, ooh, like right now I'm feeling really inspired. And then an hour later, I can be like, there's nothing going on. like I don't have any inspiration up here anymore. So that's my first thing. If you're experiencing writer's block or anything like that, I understand. All writers go through it, and you'll get back at it. Another one is, I think sometimes we get really caught up in like imagining what we want the final project to be, and we try so hard to make it perfect as we're writing it. And I think, what I said in this video, experimentation and exploration, sometimes we forget that. And I think sometimes it's important, like when you're having writer's block because you want to make it perfect, remind yourself, this is about experimentation. This is about exploration. I just need to write. I just need to get stuff on the page. And then in the revision process, I can go back and I can make it what I envision this being. But right now, I'm not going to be able to revise anything if there's nothing on the page for me to revise. Do you see what I mean? So take a few steps back, remind yourself of that. And yeah, and if you're having writer's block, my suggestion, go on to Google, find a prompt, and just write. Even if it's not good, okay? Just find some way in your day to write. because it'll get your creative mind going. And so I think that, being having some, even if you have some prompts on standby, like written down in a notebook or like screenshotted on your computer or your phone, whatever, it's good to have those to reference and to just like go back to and be like, okay, I'm gonna do this prompt, and you might end up with something that you will want to put in your story that kind of that was inspired by that prompt. So yeah, I just encourage you to keep writing. Don't get stuck on trying to make things perfect, because you know what, the world is not perfect, and that's okay. Yeah, that's it for world building and today's video. Yeah, so have fun writing, and I will see you next time.